Welcome to Surviving the Side Hustle, the show where driven entrepreneurs share the real stories, the real honest struggles, and the hard-won secrets behind performing at their best. I'm your host, Rob Tracy, a personal performance strategist and the founder of TAPS Coaching, where I partner with entrepreneurs to turn real effort into real momentum. Every week, I sit down with an owner-operator who's building something of their own, and we get past the highlight reel to find out what's actually working. Because the truth is, most people don't need more. They need to pay attention to what works for them and do more of that. So whatever you're building, let's stop spinning and start winning. We'll jump into the show right after this. If you're an entrepreneur or owner-operator who's working hard but feeling stuck spinning your wheels instead of building real momentum, I'd love to help. I want to invite you to a free strategy session with one of our performance strategists. We'll help you see what's actually working, what's holding you back, and the clearest next step to get your momentum going again. To claim your free strategy session, head over to survivingthesidehustle.com/free call. Again, that's survivingthesidehustle.com/free call. We'd love to talk to you. And now back to the episode. What's going on? And welcome back to another episode of Surviving the Side Hustle. Today's guest is Christopher Gabriel, an integrative health practitioner and performance specialist who's on a mission to help people regulate their nervous system, improve their health, and ultimately elevate their quality of life. Christopher's work blends nutrition, behavioral science, and nervous system regulation, all with the goal of solving problems at the root instead of masking symptoms. In today's conversation, we hope to dive into burnout, stress, performance, and how something as simple as your nervous system could be the hidden driver behind your decisions, your relationships, and even your success. Christopher, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, Rob. Thank you so much. It's great to be here, and I appreciate you inviting me on the show.
Of course. And actually, now that I'm kind of sitting here just thinking after reading through the intro there, I said something as simple as your nervous system could be the hidden driver. And I'm like, wait a second, the nervous system is not very simple. I'm excited to have you on so we can kind of dive into a lot of different topics and such. But I want to kind of kick things off, starting on a super high level. What is it that you're actually building now with your business and life?
Yeah. So more recently, in fact, the beginning of this year, my mantra has been consolidation. And so the last few years, I've been doing so much work outside of my private practice, a lot of advisory work, either operationally as a science officer for various companies or science advisory, like sitting on a board and advising, sort of acting as the scientific filter, developing concepts and products, technologies, biometrics, you name it. But this year, I really want to get back to my core work, and where I feel like my truest and lifelong calling has been. And that's my work with individuals and groups and in my private practice. And so there's been a sort of refocus there, a consolidation.
I love that. And I know, because in a recent conversation previously, you were talking about how you're making a lot of these changes because you're working your way towards what I believe you said, like a global peace through regulation concept or vision, I could even say. And when you were explaining it to me, when we first were talking about it, I was like, geez, this sounds like a massive vision. This is something really cool to go after, because I go to a lot of networking events. I hear a lot of people talking about their businesses and things, but not too often do I hear people with such inspiring and incredible things that they're chasing after. And I want to ask you, where did this idea come from for you personally?
Yeah, thank you. So I have this theory, okay?
Okay.
And that theory is that every human conflict in human history, whether it's a war, disagreement with your spouse or partner, fighting with your little brother, that all of those conflicts are the product of a dysregulated nervous system. And so, in short, if we were all more self-regulated, the world would be a more peaceful, more co-regulative place. Many of the conflicts that we have, or our perception of conflict, would disappear as people were more regulated, essentially feeling safe, right? Safe in their environment, safe in their interactions with each other, safe in their work, right? So this is kind of a fundamental of the mission I have and the work that I'm doing. Of course, world peace or global peace is, that's far reaching as far as an ambition. For me, it's just one person at a time that I can reach and educate and guide in how to achieve nervous system regulation and maintain that throughout their lives, right? And all sorts of situations, right, that we might find ourselves in that we might not be aware of as being dysregulating. So a lot of this is educational, but then the approach is very practical.
Can you break it down for us a little bit here? What happens and why is a dysregulated nervous system? Why does this lead, or why do you say that this kind of leads to all these different conflicts?
Yeah. So the fundamentals of this is the human nervous system. We have what's called the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic just means automatic, right? It's all the systems, processes in the body that just happen automatically without our conscious thought, right? Your heart beating, breathing, digestion, all these things happen without us having to consciously think about them. Thank God, right?
Yeah.
Imagine I forget to beat my heart. That would be problematic. Within this autonomic nervous system, you have two branches. One is called the parasympathetic branch, and the other is the sympathetic branch. Parasympathy, or the parasympathetic branch, is what we call the rest and digest state, right? It's when we're calm. We're not in fear or agitated. We're not perceiving of a threat, right? We feel safe when we are parasympathetic. On the other hand, when we are sympathetically activated, so that autonomic branch is sympathetically activated, most people are familiar with this. It's what's most associated with the fight or flight response, okay? Most people know fight or flight, but there's actually 4 responses of the sympathetic branch. It's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Fight and flight, we know. Anytime you feel like fighting, a person feels like fighting, it is because of sympathetic activation. Anytime you feel like running away from something or avoiding something, fleeing from it, you are sympathetically activated, a person is. If you freeze, and I want to define these 4 things real quick. If you freeze, right, shut down, withdraw, that is the freeze state of the sympathetic activation of the autonomic nervous system. And then fawning might be the least familiar of all of them for people, but it's anytime that you are diminishing yourself, attempting to appear weak or harmless, not a threat, that is the fawn state. It also can express as people pleasing. So when I have clients or patients that are constantly sort of looking to please over, often self-betraying themselves in the process, I help them to recognize, to become aware that that is the sympathetic arm activating in the fawn state. Now, you have these 4 different responses. There is some nuance. You can be like a little fight, a little freeze, a little fawn, a little flee, but really you only have these 4 responses. The other aspect of this is when you are sympathetically activated. And I think this is sort of the key to understanding the behavioral part of it, okay? Because really, at the core, our nervous system is responsible for virtually all behavior, right? So if you're wondering why you're doing something, start looking at the nervous system and the state of your nervous system. Point being, regulating that system, I'll go on in a second, but regulating that system is why it's so important for us in terms of our quality of life, quality of interactions with other people, how we approach our goals, our identity, who we are fundamentally is being driven by what is your default state? Is it parasympathy, calm, rest, digest, or is it sympathetic activation? And I can tell you, particularly here in the US, there are so many people that are walking around not realizing that they are chronically sympathetically activated. They're under stress all the time. And when I work with people and we start to unlock this for them, I mean, it's a tremendous game changer. It's like their whole life and life perspective changes as their autonomic state changes. So yeah, it's a powerful part of the human condition.
So because I'm thinking here, I'm trying to relate myself to it. And because when you were talking about the fawn state, that's one that I'm not too familiar with. Everyone harps on the fight or flight, and then freeze was kind of like, for, at least in my world, it was kind of like brought to me, at least relatively recently, within the last 10 years, something. Somebody had mentioned it. I was like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. But the fawn state, I'm not too familiar with, but you say that kind of shows up as like people pleasing. And I was trying to think of myself when I was growing my health and fitness business. And I was always in this people pleasing kind of state. Like if I had a time scheduled for myself to work out or something for me to be doing, and then somebody cancels and needed to reschedule into my time, I would almost always push it over and let them take that. So then I would almost sacrifice myself to make sure that all my clients were busy getting their workouts in, and I would never have time for myself. So I was thinking to myself too, there is like, okay, well, if I'm constantly doing that, maybe I was never getting into as much the parasympathetic nervous system. Long story short, what I'm trying to get to is what is like the ideal balance? Because it's probably not beneficial to just always be in the parasympathetic state too, right? Otherwise, you probably wouldn't get too much done.
Well, so I love that you said this, okay? Because this is often the misconception that people have, right? We get so stuck in this idea that we need to be sympathetically activated to be productive that we think when we're calm, it's going to lead us to be like unmotivated, undriven, to not want to accomplish anything. And I want to tell people, and this is a lot of the work I do too, in re-educating, that it's actually the opposite. It's when we are consistently parasympathetic. And by the way, this is how I define well-being is how many hours of any given day are you parasympathetic versus sympathetic, right? And the goal is to try to get all 24 hours in parasympathy because well, let me give you a good example, okay, of why you would be more productive in parasympathetic versus sympathetic activation. Okay. Number one, when you're sympathetic, right, you have what's called a sympathetic drive. That drive comes with a whole host of different neurochemicals, hormones. One of them is norepinephrine, right? Or the precursor to adrenaline most people are familiar with. Your body can only sustain that state for so long before you approach something like burnout, okay? Before it moves from drive to anxiety, to anxious thoughts, to depression, okay? That is a one-way street to your system shutting down and being less productive. Parasympathy, on the other hand, right, is fully sustainable. It's actually self-sustaining, right? Because your body is recovering and outputting in a balanced way, right? I don't even like using that word, but in a way that is sustainable. The other thing that's key to this is when you are I'll start with sympathetic activation. When you are sympathetically activated, I have a colleague of mine. She's a professor adjunct at Stanford and Santa Clara University. I love her term. I'm going to use it. Shout out to her. She calls it flipping your lid. And I think that's sort of the perfect visual because what happens is the prefrontal cortex, right, which is where all of our executive function resides. So our best decision-making, right, our ability to sort of look at variables and work out the best response to them is completely disconnected from the mind when we're sympathetically activated. Okay. And what you're left with are the emotional centers of the brain, the amygdala. You get some motor control because just in case you do need to fight, or flight, you get activated to be able to mobilize. And so if you're making decisions, if you're making choices, if you're moving through life with, primarily default state sympathetic, you have very little access to the true computational power, the true decision-making power of your brain. Conversely, when you are parasympathetic, now you have full connection of your executive function. Now you can really think and make decisions with your higher mind equipped. And I can tell you in my experience with clients and even in my own life, The more parasympathetic I am, it's like life moves and flows in unison and in synergy and synchronicity so much smoother. You can enter into, like in sports, they call it like the zone, right? Or the flow state. The zone or flow state is really this combination of focus and calm. And so you need parasympathetic state in order to reach it. I know it was a lot, it's a mouthful, but did that answer your question?
Yeah, to a good degree there. So it's mostly, so we want to be working towards being as parasympathetic as possible in our day-to-day lives. And so then my question is like, why haven't we evolved to only have the parasympathetic? Like why even continue to have this sympathetic state even for us?
Yeah, great question. So the nervous system itself, okay, and the way these two branches function, I want to be clear, I'm not villainizing the sympathetic nervous system. It very beautifully is doing everything it can, our whole nervous system, to keep us alive. All it cares about is our survival. And there was a very long period in human history where we were under consistent threat. We were like, being chased by lions and tigers and bears and spiders and snakes. And, you didn't know when your next meal was going to happen or if you were going to find shelter. And so you needed a system that was highly adaptable to this environment, right? To be on head on a swivel, constant threat alert. That same system that helped us survive to get to where we are now, with AI and refrigerators and, grocery stores and no lions and tigers nearby, is kind of malfunctioning in a modern context, right? It's seeking a threat where there is none, and it's responding to what we perceive as a threat as if our survival is at stake. And so this is number one, why we didn't evolve to not have one. We need it, okay? It has been a key component of our survival. But in a modern context, what we need to do, and this is where it'd be great if we started educating people, younger the better, even when their nervous system is forming, in those formative years from like age 0 to 7 years old, and then on to 25 years old, about in how to self-regulate, because then that sympathetic activation, when it occurs, we would know, number one, how to identify it, to become aware that we are, but then how to bring ourselves out of it.
Yeah. See, I think that's a superpower that I've kind of adopted or brought in over the years, was like bringing myself down through the different modalities of stuff like breathing techniques and meditation and stuff. And I feel like that's really helped elevate my performance just as a person in terms of training and athletics, but then also for entrepreneurship too. So I could see that being like the main thing to do. So is that what a lot of what you're doing? I know you compass a whole lot with your coaching and your practice, but those some of like the early things that you try to bring in and equip some of your clients with is like the tools and techniques to push themselves in that parasympathetic more so than not.
Yeah, it really is. It's become, early in my career, I was primarily focused on the nutritional sciences. I was very much on the more clinical side of things. I was treating disease and illness, everything from diabetes to Hashimoto's to hypothyroidism, polycystic ovarian syndrome. I was doing that through the Western biomedical lens of nutrition and lifestyle, et cetera. But over the years, as I worked with, client after client, what I noticed was that there's a deep correlation with mental health. So, probably 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 of the clients I was seeing, the reason that they're experiencing a diminish in their health status was due to something like a life event, like a loss, a divorce, some trauma of some kind that they had experienced. And so if I wasn't addressing that, I wasn't really helping them root cause solve their issues. And then sustainably, the behaviors that we were looking to adopt were also more problematic to adopt. And so I started working on the brain itself. Initially, I called it brain training. or brainwashing, which was kind of funny, but very transparently, like, I'm going to brainwash you now. I'm going to tell you some things that you can never unknow, and that's going to help direct your behavior. But then, the last decade or so of my practice, the nervous system and understanding how not just how it affects behavior, but how it affects all of our biology and physiology, right? As a potential vector for disease. It's become one of these two pillars, right? Nervous system regulation, reconditioning on one side, and nutrition on the other, because you need to fuel this system, right? If the system doesn't have the constituent elements that it needs to function, then of course, logically, it's going to slide into dysfunction. And so those are really the two core pillars of my work now.
Interesting stuff there. And as it's kind of seeing how it kind of grows and how you're growing too as a practitioner and a specialist yourself. What's been your personal experience with burnout and dysregulation? Have you always been on the forefront of it, like being aware of it and preventing it? Or have you gone through any bouts of burnout yourself?
Yeah, no, not at all. I've gone through repeated cycles of burnout. In fact, it was cyclical in my life for a long time. I mean, this is going back to even like high school, right? I was definitely sort of that A-type personality, high achiever, put a lot of stress and pressure on myself to perform at a high level. And then when I started my practice, there was such a demand for the work that I was doing that I had a very hard time, like you were kind of suggesting. It's like I had a hard time saying no. I probably 4 times, 5 times the number of patients I've seen done pro bono work for people, people you just randomly meet that I hear. And so I would go through these burnout cycles, and, eventually I would just have to kind of check out for like a month or two, fully recharge the battery. I had the skills, the knowledge, insight of how to sort of self-heal, but I hadn't found that balance because, my calling in this life is to serve others, and it's so hard to pull myself away sometimes. But I think now in my life I've probably found a good balance in recovery, a way to deliver and over-deliver in some cases without entering into that cycle again.
So if you feel yourself kind of creeping back into it, or somebody else is like, say someone's just started their business or they're kicking things off, they're juggling maybe multiple businesses, and they feel themselves kind of getting closer to that edge, what would be your advice to kind of like, hey, let's like turn things around here?
Yeah, I think one of the principles that I guide people through and then also apply to myself, and I would suggest here, is number one, structure. All living things thrive in structure, whether it's, a plant, an insect, your dog, or, a human being. We all thrive in structure. And so having a structured approach to your daily life, okay, I don't suggest applying this, for years in advance, but really address day-to-day stressors and recovery really helps with managing your output and what's called allostatic load. Okay. Like your brain and body essentially at any given day has a capacity, right? When you exceed that capacity, that's when it starts, what you're doing starts to express as a stress on the body. Mm-hmm. And so having that structure in place allows you to really work within your limits for a given period of time, know when to take breaks, intermittent breaks, micro naps, have a regular sleep schedule, regular nutrition schedule, and know that sticking to that structure is how you are going to thrive. So particularly for new business owners, this is really important because it can be so easy as an entrepreneur to just be like, never shut off. Like you're working 24 hours a day because you're like, number one, I can. And there might be some slight output, which is mostly perception. We get really locked into this idea that any time off is like a missed opportunity. And I want to encourage people that like, you're not missing any opportunity. The doors will be open, right? The opportunities will come. Really important that you are in the best shape of your life so you can show up for when they do.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you kind of talked on like staying within the boundaries or the routine or the structure. And I'm obviously I'm open about talking how I'm like against the hustle culture of today's world and like grind, sleep when I'm dead kind of thing. But is there some truth to doing that occasionally? Like, can you progressively overload your nervous system to continue to handle bigger and bigger stressors without like
Absolutely. So, well, two things. Number one, in life is going to happen, and there are inevitably going to be periods where you're just going to have to grind. Okay. Like you're going to have to work hard. You're going to have to strive for something. You have to push yourself past your limits. You're going to be tired. You're going to be fatigued. Like ideally, yes, like we're all just living in, parasympathetic land as we progress through life. But the truth of the matter is, life is a struggle a lot of times. Okay. And being successful, achieving anything requires hard work. So I don't want to at all give the impression that hard work is not necessary or that you shouldn't be working hard. Definitely. Okay. But what you can do in conjunction with this, and like you were saying, it's like what expands that capacity, right? Your ability to take on more without it expressing as a negative stress on the body. There's a few ways to do that, otherwise known, by the way, as resilience building. One of those ways of doing that, and this is something I work on with virtually every patient client that I work with, is what's called hormetic stressors. Okay, so there's a process in the body, in our physiology, it's called hormesis. Hormesis is a positive adaptation in our body, in our physiology, to a stimulus. Some examples of hormetic practices would be things like sauna, right? So heat exposure is a hormetic practice. You're applying heat stress to the body, and the body reacts positively in a positive adaptive way, as long as you don't overcook yourself and you hydrate. It is net positive for your nervous system. Cold exposure is another one. It's been very popular nowadays. Everyone's cold plunging or both, but that is also a hormetic practice. It produces a net positive adaptation on our biology and will produce more resilience. Applying voluntary stresses, and the key word there is voluntary, to the body of some kind. Exercise is another one, by the way, just lifting weights, resistance training in particular. It results in a positive adaptation to our biology and nervous system. But doing that repeatedly builds resilience such that the same stress that would have pushed you over the edge before no longer does. And so our capacity has expanded.
Mm. Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking of other examples of you said it's called a hormetic stressor or hormetic stress. Yeah. And because I was thinking too, somebody had once said like, oh, if you're traveling across time zones, another great thing would be to get outside into the sunlight, like as soon as you can, so that you can kind of get yourself onto a better circadian rhythm. I guess light can also be something like that too. I see some people also doing these like infrared lights and saunas and stuff like that too. I'm guessing light, that can also be a huge piece of it.
So I would put morning sunlight viewing or sunlight viewing, throughout the day, which by the way, I do highly recommend everyone to do. And I'll explain why, as more a part of what we call circadian biology. Okay, so most people have heard now of a circadian rhythm, right? That's our sleep-wake cycle, right? It's typically tied to the solar-lunar cycle. So as the sun rises and sun sets, our biology responds to that. Getting morning sunlight in your eyes, 5 to 10 minutes of morning sunlight exposure, sets our big circadian clock, okay? This is important because you can think of, the circadian rhythm as the big clock that tunes all the hundreds, if not thousands, of other smaller clocks within the body, right? Our digestion, our metabolism, our sleep is all intrinsically linked to the setting of that clock. Really important for productivity, really important for mental health, for overall well-being. Not necessarily a hormetic stress, but definitely a part of a structured approach to wellness and well-being. Red light therapy, which I know has also gained popularity more recently, is also excellent for our physiology, for mitochondrial health, for energy production, skin health, even brain health. Now we know that exposure to certain wavelengths of red light to be beneficial. The same wavelengths, by the way, we're getting from the sun, right?
Yeah.
But now, in a controlled way. There's also people that either they can't get up out of bed and outside and view morning sunlight, or they're in a geography where the sun rises later in the morning, that do use what's called a SAD device. It's basically a sunlight simulating lamp. Those can work too.
So where for the hormetic stress resistance or resilience training, how do you know what is appropriate and how to progress that? Because wouldn't just like us setting deadlines for ourselves kind of do something similar? Because that's putting stress onto our body, and we like obviously we get better at it, and then we like. So I'm thinking for myself, like, all right, I told myself I'm going to do a newsletter every week, and the newsletter goes live on Thursdays. So I imposed this deadline for myself to kind of get that going. Sometimes if I wake up or if I forget and I'm like, oh, shoot, it's already Wednesday night, I didn't do that. Now I've got this little bit of stressor coming through. I want to push through there on like a bigger picture. The practice of setting a deadline, is that considered like a hormetic stressor?
So hormetic stresses are really all about our physiology and biology. Something like setting a deadline or applying some consequence to the things we do is more of a psychological stressor, which absolutely can be good. I mean, one of the things I do also work with people in improving resilience, is to consistently do hard things, right? And hard things are, like the word hard there is an extremely relative term, right? One thing that's hard for one person could be super easy for another. But if it's hard for you, writing that newsletter every day and you're experiencing what's called limbic friction, some psychological friction to doing it, pushing past that and doing it anyway is absolutely going to build more psychological resilience. There's definitely some neuroscience happening here, some neurochemistry that's happening as a component of that. One way or another, it is going to be hugely beneficial, right? For your brain in a longitudinal way, meaning like you're going to have better brain health, right? In doing hard things. Hormonally, it improves hormone function, and practically in our lives, you're going to be more successful. You're going to be higher achieving if you're able to do hard things. So it's more of a psychological stress than it is a hormetic physiological stress.
Okay. Yeah, now I'm understanding the differences there. Well, thank you for clearing that part up there. Hey, what's up? Sorry for the interruption. It's Rob. One quick thing before we keep going. If you're feeling stuck or like you've lost the momentum that you used to have, here's a simple, free first step. Take the assessment at gettheprime.com. In just a few minutes, it'll show you exactly where you're leaking momentum so you can get that ball rolling again with the Prime app. It's completely free. So if you're new here, this is the best place to start. Go ahead to gettheprime.com and take the free assessment. All right, let's get back into it. Okay, so I know that you had mentioned, I want to bring us back over to the nutrition because you had mentioned that this is a major pillar for you, or at least it started off and now it's still a major part of your practice and things. Can you explain a little bit more on how the foods and how nutrition, or why I guess it's such a major pillar for our nervous systems?
Yeah, I think one of the analogies that I give so often, so I'm a big Formula One fan. I love the engineering. I love, like the sound of the cars, although this year it's a little different. I won't get into that. It's like what I have people imagine is like, if you close your eyes, you imagine, a Formula One car, right? And imagine you're filling up that car with like standard, unleaded gas from your local gas station. How well is that car going to perform? Just so your audience knows, like, the kind of fuel that a Formula One car uses is this very like high octane specialized fuel. If it's not given it, eventually it might not even turn on, but eventually it will definitely break down. It won't function well. Well, our bodies, our biology is the same. If we're not getting proper nourishment, and by nourishment, by the way, also includes hydration. So if we're not hydrated and nourished well, these systems in our body are literally unable to function. A good example of this would be how our muscles function, right? So in order to flex a muscle, we need the micronutrient calcium. In order to relax that muscle, we need magnesium. Now, I'm very much oversimplifying here, but the point is, if we're deficient in either of those nutrients, that muscle contraction and relaxation doesn't happen, or it doesn't happen very well. And this is true of every physiological process in the body. If you are not well nourished, you are on a path to dysfunction and often disease. I mean, we know that there are correlations between many diseases and malnutrition. One of the earliest ones, if you studied any food history, which not many people have, is sailors back in the day would get a disease called scurvy, until they figured out that if they have a little bit of vitamin C, the scurvy disappears. The scurvy was not some random disease they just happened to pick up. It was a direct result in being deficient in vitamin C. So does that make sense? That these constituent elements, these micronutrients, macronutrients, trace minerals, they're powering all the systems. And so with every client that I work with, patient that I work with, if I'm not addressing nutrition, I can't be expecting them to get the kind of results we're looking for because they literally don't have the fuel that their body needs to function at a high level.
Yeah, I love that, and I'm familiar with that story of the food history with the scurvy and such. And oftentimes when I'm talking to my clients or speaking on stage or a workshop or something, I dive into like what we're consuming and how we need to be a little more intentional behind it. I talk about vehicle, kind of like your Formula One that you were saying. I simplify it way down for people though. Like, okay, well, the things that you eat are kind of like the car that you're driving. If you're where you're at currently and you're trying to get to your goal, which is down the road, you hop in the car. The quality and types of proteins that you eat is kind of like the structure. The carbohydrates that you're consuming is kind of like the gasoline that's making you go. And then the types of fats is kind of like the oil that you're putting in so that the car can operate and move smoothly. And then I tell them like it's important to have a good vehicle to go down the road. But as you're driving down the road, sometimes dirt gets kicked up onto your windshield and then bugs get splattered and that bugs and dirt you wash away with your wiper fluid and your wipers. And I use that as like the kind of like the digital nutrition that we're consuming, like the Netflix or social media binging. That's the stuff that's getting in on the windshield, blocking our vision. And then you could wipe it away with some educational, motivational content to help clear the way so that you stay motivated and driven to get down to the road. But if you have too much of that stuff, you can also be overwhelming. Like there was a time period where I was like, all right, no more social media, no more TV. I'm only going to listen to audiobooks and podcasts, and I'm only going to take coaching courses. And I tried to just flood myself with just solely motivational, educational content. But that slowed down my progress as well, like getting caught in a thunderstorm with the wipers super fast. Like I still couldn't see clearly enough to drive at a fast pace. I needed to kind of find some balance and regulate how much I was bringing in, and then setting up these systems so that I could, at the time, I want to say like regulating what I was consuming to make sure that I was moving smoothly down the road. Can you talk a little bit about that on like maybe some of the stuff that we consume that's not dietary nutrition, but maybe some of the content and things and how that kind of motivates us and affects our nervous systems?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that analogy with the car. It's great how the macronutrients are powering that whole system. Yeah, I mean, one of the areas, and going back to the nervous system, we live in, so you have these two pillars, right? Nervous system and nutrition. And then you have another set of pillars, right, that we're kind of talking about now, and that's behavior on one side and environment on another. And it's really the combination of behavior and environment that leads to optimum health, performance, well-being. Understanding how our environments affect our mental state, our nervous system state, emotional state is really important, our ability to perform at a high level and sustain that. Modern day, we are just inundated with stimuli, right? It's nonstop. And it's almost impossible to completely, remove ourselves from without, having like a soundproof room and, a white noisemaker. But what you can do is start to set some boundaries around that stimulation. So like you're experimenting with, removing social media and TV and everything else. That's great. Maybe, on the more extreme edge of, a behavioral shift or an environmental shift. What I encourage people to do is set boundaries around it and understand it as it relates to our neurochemistry, to our attentional systems, to our dopaminergic system. So how dopamine functions, because a lot of the trap of these devices and their stimuli is met, literally by design, they're engineered to hijack these systems and take them over and keep us locked in. That's why, like short form content is maybe the most addictive thing on planet Earth, right? Because it's driving that system. Having some boundaries and then really designing the environment to give you the opportunity to be in a low stimulus environment is the name of the game here, right? Because that overstimulation, just like so many experiences, can lead to nervous system dysregulation, right? Mm-hmm. You see people have this feeling, a lot of people come to me with this perpetual feeling of overwhelm. Like there's just too much going on, too much in life, too much in career, too much in, their screens and everything else. And so it's like any other thing that's dropped into that system for them pushes them over the edge into emotional reactivity, poor social behaviors, hyper emotionality, anger and sadness. It's amazing how dysregulating to our system being overstimulated can be. So my best advice is start to structure it. And one good example of this really quickly is, so we have in the brain, right? We have limitations on how much and for how long we can focus. This time frame of focus is called our Ultradian rhythm. Typically for most people, there's some outliers here. The typical person's Ultradian rhythm is about 90 minutes total. That's broken up into 2 45-minute segments. And then within those segments, the brain will periodically kind of check out a little bit. It's what's called an intermittent attentional break or intermittent break, and then come back. If we think in terms of these and you have about 3 Ultradian rhythms for optimal like cognitive performance per day. Okay, so you have 3.
So 6 cycles of 45 minutes.
That's right. Yeah. Those within those 3 Ultradian rhythms that we have each day, if we think about harnessing our most productive time during the day, which is typically the morning, you want to get those 3 in early in the day. And then the rest of the day, you're sort of slowly tapering your cognitive load. You're tapering the stimuli, you're tapering the stress you're putting on your body so that you can wind down and then sleep. Those Ultradian rhythms also can be structured for when we are engaging in a high stimulus activity, like doom scrolling on Instagram or, watching Netflix. What I recommend, and by the way, I do this with my son. I have a 11-year-old son. If he's going to use the iPad, if he's going to play Roblox or, watch a TV show, we do it in 45-minute blocks. And then he takes a break. That allows his brain and dopaminergic system to do a little reset, frame shift to something else, and then come back. And so that way that system doesn't get as hijacked. It doesn't become so overstimulated.
Yeah. And as you were saying that, I was kind of thinking to myself like, oh, maybe that's also why TV shows and podcasts and a lot of these longer forms of content that people are consuming tend to be around that like 45-minute kind of window. I remember, I think it was called The Irishman or something. Some movie had came out a few years ago and it was like 3-4 hours long or something. And people were like, oh, I had to break it up into segments because it's just too much to consume at one time. So that's pretty interesting. And I know we're kind of getting close on time. I just wanted to get your quick take on, before we kind of wrap into some promotional stuff for you. What is your take on like sensory deprivation tanks?
Yeah, I think that experience is actually extremely positive. I think it's something people should experience at some point. I don't know if it needs to be in a full, zero stimulus environment, like floating in a tank. But what's good about, so there's many benefits to it. One of them is it allows you to really, because you're not surrounded with so much noise, you can really pick up the signal of your body. There's a process, it's called interoception. Okay, you can think of it like interperception. This is our ability to become aware of the state of our nervous system. When you're sensory deprived, right, you're, again, just not surrounded by sounds and noises and everything else, you can become a bit more in tune with your body in that way. Peace, stillness, quiet, these are all things that we should be intentionally incorporating into every day, even if it's just 5 minutes of just sit still, be quiet, let the brain do some processing, let the body truly sink into parasympathy. It's the fertile ground for creativity, for emotional processing, for psychological processing. I couldn't recommend it enough. It's just a little bit of stillness and quiet every day.
Yeah, I love that. And I used to intentionally sit down and meditate for a good 10, 15 minutes on a daily basis. And I had great practice I got close to 300 days in a row doing that.
Awesome.
But now I've kind of just no radio or anything when I'm driving between different appointments. I try to just let my brain kind of slow down. Obviously, I'd wear enough while I'm still driving, but try to minimize some of these things so I can kind of process things. And as much as I can, try to do that. So I love that you brought that up there. But I want to be courteous of the time. I don't want to take up too much of your day here because I know you've got a lot of things going on. But I know that we were talking that you've got a lot of exciting things going on. I believe recently had converted to a concierge style service for your own practice. And I know you're podcasting more and speaking a lot more. So what are some of the big things that we listeners can get excited to see from you or look forward to seeing more from you?
Yeah, one of the goals right now for me, it's been a long-term goal. It's just been building up, and now I think it's starting to realize is, how do I reach more people? How do I help more people, serve more people? And so I'm starting to develop more content, YouTube channel, and be more consistent on social media to get the word out there. You can find me on Instagram, find me on YouTube. My website is lifescienceperformance.com if you want to learn more about my private practice and all the services that I provide. Love to work with people one-on-one. As you said, yes, this year I launched a concierge model. It's 2 tiers of concierge that include everything that I do: unlimited one-on-one sessions, diagnostic panels. I meant to mention that before, that I do a lot of diagnostics. Everything from micronutrient evaluations to gut microbiome mapping to comprehensive metabolomics. And all of that data I utilize to, further refine and personalize for everyone that I work with. That's actually been a big part of my research and work is diagnostics. So you can check out that on my website and, follow me on social media. I'm going to be releasing more and more content over the months and years ahead.
Perfect. I love it. And what is your handles on social media? Is it just Christopher Gabriel?
So it's Christopher Gabriel Health on Instagram, and then you can find me on YouTube under Life Science Performance.
Awesome. I'll make sure to tag you in the show notes for that so everybody can quickly and easily get to those as well. So yeah, go follow him. A lot of great stuff. If you're like me, love this conversation, you're a high performer, building business, these are the things that you got to at least be considering. And if you can, obviously consuming some of Christopher's content so that you can stay up to date on a lot of this stuff too. And reaching out to him too. It's pretty easy to get in touch with. Conversation's excellent. So I highly recommend working with Christopher and following along on his journey that he's got going on. And Chris, I want to say thanks, man. This was awesome. I really got a lot of value. This is the stuff that I'm really interested in. So hearing it coming from you, who's well educated and read up and on cutting edge on a lot of this stuff is awesome, because I'm feeling like I'm getting firsthand experience, and this is pretty awesome experience for me. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, man. such a pleasure being here, and honored to be a guest. I'm looking forward to future conversations.
Of course. All right, man. Thank you so much. And until next time, guys, peace, peace, peace. All right, sweet. That's a wrap on this week's episode of Surviving the Side Hustle. If this conversation gave you something that you can use, would you do me a favor and follow the show? And then please leave a quick rating and review wherever you listen. It genuinely helps more entrepreneurs find these stories, and it helps spread the word of our guests. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, do us both a favor and share the episode their way. You can connect with me and find everything that we mentioned over at survivingthesidehustle.com. Until next time, remember, pay attention to what works for you and then do more of that. That's how you stop spinning and start winning.